Guardian Angel, an Angelica Dale mystery by P.K. Armstrong. Chapter 19. Denise stared at her reflection, trying to put her eyeliner on, realized she was shaking, and stopped to rest her arm on the edge of her makeup table. "Hey, my love." With a jolt, Denise focused behind her and realized her husband John Meadows had spoken as he was watching her from the doorway. She conjured up what she hoped was a genuine smile. "Headed out to girls' night? Where is it at this time? Destiny on Grand?" John inquired. "Oh, we're going low-key tonight. Frankly, everyone has had a long week. We're going to that jazz club on Ninth, Maxine's." John moved across the room and placed his hands on her shoulders. Leaning in, he placed a light kiss on her head. "That's good. I worry about you less when it's low-key." He caught her eye in the mirror. She smiled again, genuinely this time, and placed her hand on his. "I would never do anything to embarrass you or our family. You know that, don't you, John?" "I trust you, Denise." He kissed her head again and walked from the room. Denise stared at herself in the mirror. Trust, she thought to herself, is so easily lost. She had known Simon Rain when she was younger, working as his assistant. She had learned, soon after she started working for him, that he wasn't a nice man. But she was impressed with his pathological cockiness. She had mistaken it for business acumen, confidence. Now she knew he was a sociopath who would stop at nothing to get what he wants. After she found out she was pregnant with Deidre, she knew she had to get away. John Meadows, her on-again, off-again boyfriend, was easy to convince, but it had come back to haunt her. Simon figured it out, and he hovered over her like a dark cloud every time she saw him in town. She teared up again as she remembered his cryptic call earlier. "Hello?" "Denise." Even Simon's voice was putridity. "Who is this?" "I'm hurt you have forgotten me so easily." Denise drew in a breath as she recognized who was on the other end of the phone. "Simon," she whispered. She looked quickly around as if someone could hear, even though she knew she was alone. "Why are you calling me?" "I need to see you." "No." "No? My, haven't we gotten sure of ourselves?" Simon said angrily. "You will meet me, my love, because if you don't, you know what will happen." Denise walked into the bar of the Mayfair Hotel and scanned the room looking for Simon. She spotted him in a corner and saw him smirk at her appearance. She had dressed as nondescript as possible, high-necked, long-sleeved blouse, flare skirt which ended at her calves, with a pair of flats. Maybe she was trying to protect herself, but the material of her clothing wasn't enough to protect her from Simon Rain. She hadn't wanted to meet him, certainly not at the hotel he had selected, but she couldn't say no. She wasn't prepared to reap the consequences. "Denise!" Simon stood and smiled with his arms partially opened as if he was meeting a long-lost friend. Denise glanced at the patrons at the accompanying tables and saw smiles. They believed the facade. She pasted a smile on her face, avoided Simon's hug, and sat after he pulled out her chair. Simon Rain wasn't an ugly man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and since passing 40 had become paunchy. But his emerald eyes and olive complexion gave him a Mediterranean look that appealed to women. "Drink?" Simon motioned for the server. "She'll have the Merlot." "Actually, coffee is fine." The server walked away and Simon sneered. "Show of independence? You think that husband of yours likes an independent woman, eh?" "It isn't true, you know. No man wants to drink with an independent, unagreeable woman, no matter how beautiful she is." Unanswerable. Denise just looked at him, and he stared back. She averted her gaze. "So how's it going, Denise? How's the family?" He spoke as if they were sharing some joke. "Fine. Things are fine." She paused. "What is it you want, Simon?" Simon laughed and drank some wine. "That's what you asked me on the phone. Maybe I just wanted to see you." He reached across the table as if to take her hand. She jerked her hand back and put it in her lap. Simon laughed again. The server returned with Denise's unwanted coffee. She sugared it lavishly, added cream, and tentatively took a sip. Simon made no attempt to soften his words. I had a visitor, a detective from the Filmore Police Department. He paused to watch her response, but Denise's chin was almost resting on her chest as she stared at her clasped hands in her lap. He had questions about your friend. Denise's head shot up, and she looked at Simon. My friend? Evan. Denise's face went a little pale, and her breathing shallow, but she did not want Simon to know the mention of Evan's name was unnerving her. She firmed up her chin and looked Simon directly in the eye. Evan? What about Evan? Don't pretend innocence, Denise, Simon spat at her. Detective Roland, he said with a sneer, was interested in all those projects you gave him. You know, you are the one who introduced us. He gave her a malicious grin. You are the one who told him what to do. Don't be ridiculous. You already knew each other. I just told him what you told me to tell him. Denise's voice was growing louder, and Simon put a hand on the arm she had placed back onto the table to quell her. Denise jerked her arm back again and placed her hand in her lap. She leaned in and lowered her voice, still indignant at Simon's implication. You asked me if I knew anyone for odd jobs. You never said what you wanted done, she responded in a rushed whisper. I just gave him the addresses, she finished lamely. Simon's eyes narrowed, and his voice, although quiet, was full of the brutishness she had remembered all too well. Ah, already making your case. You listen to me. If that detective comes a-callin'— What? Denise interrupted. Why would he come to me? Did you give him my name? Simon gave an imperceptible shake of his head. I'm not an idiot. I wouldn't do something stupid. You are weak and would crumble instantly. But this guy, this Detective Roland, was not some dumb cop. There was something about him. Simon paused as he remembered Roland's not-so-veiled threat. He's going to get to you eventually, and when he does, you better keep your mouth shut. Simon leaned forward and purposely grabbed her arm in a way that no one from the next table could see, and gripped hard. If you don't, my love, that husband of yours is going to learn the truth about you and that little brat of yours. No, Denise whispered desperately. Yes. His voice dropped even lower as he said maliciously, maybe it's time for that little girl to spend some quality time with her father. Denise's stomach immediately began to implode upon itself, and she fought the nausea and the desire to faint. She stood up quickly, determined to get away from Simon. She stood up so quickly her chair fell over. My dear, Simon said in an extra loud voice, are you okay? The room stopped and stared. I'm sorry, Denise muttered, and fled the bar. John Meadows sat at the coffee and wine bar across the street from the glass monstrosity that housed Rain Holdings. Midtown was consistently busy this time of day. Men and women smartly dressed headed to work. Each time the traffic light in front of the window changed, John's view of the large glass doors was briefly obstructed. He had been sitting there since 6 a.m., so he was pretty sure he had not missed him. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Pulling it out, he read Denise and swiped to ignore. Anger boiled up in his stomach and began to choke him as he thought of the confession he wrenched from his wife late last night. She had returned home from a girls' night badly shaken, and when he asked her what the matter was, she had dissolved into tears. Denise, I insist you tell me what has happened. I can't. I don't want you to hate me, she continued to sob. He tried taking her in his arms to comfort her, but she pushed him away. Don't. I don't deserve it, she said almost violently. He poured a small glass of brandy and placed it into her hands. Here, drink this. She took a sip and shivered, but downed the rest in one gulp. Her breathing began to return to normal. John sat down next to Denise, took the glass from her hands, and placed it on the table in front of the sofa. Taking a chance, he picked up one of her shaking hands and caressed it. She did not push him away this time. Please tell me, he begged. The story came out, first slowly, then in a rush of words. When I worked for Simon Rain, I did some things that were not right. I was young, and even though I suspected something wasn't right, I didn't know how to stop. He was so nice-looking and confident, and he flattered me. We first met when I was hanging out with some friends of mine. Well, I called them friends at the time. They introduced me to some wealthy people, mostly men, who liked it when we dressed up and showed up to their parties. After I got a little older and thought about it, I realized Simon focused in on me specifically from the beginning. He called me beautiful, and he said he wanted to give me the world. After knowing each other for a few weeks, he offered me a job at his company as a receptionist. Most of the people who came into his office were legitimate business contacts. He had a lot of legitimate business, but there was another side to his business that was, well, frankly, shady. He would manipulate people into selling to him. John ventured a question. Manipulate? How? At one of the parties we went to, I took a high school friend of mine that had tagged along with his girlfriend, Evan. They seemed to have some sort of connection, so one day Simon asked me if Evan needed some work. I called Evan, and they met. Evan told me one night when he had been drinking that he makes things difficult for people who refuse to sell to Simon Rain. He would start fires, bust water pipes, or whatever else necessary. I looked in the files and realized every time I called Evan to meet with Simon, one of the properties Simon was watching had some sort of trouble. Denise sighed and her eyes glossed over with unshed tears. She tried to take her hand away, but John held on tightly. I didn't like him anymore. Simon, that is, but I didn't know how to get away from him. So I played along and made the calls, and one time I even delivered some cash to Evan. It was about that time when I first met you at that sandwich shop. I liked you so much, but I was ashamed of what I had become, especially when you worked for Simon and then quit because you realized what a crook he was. John had to restrain himself from reaching out for Denise again. I wanted you to quit too. I was going to ask you that morning, after we spent that night together, but I got nervous and tongue-tied and didn't speak, he confessed. Denise gave him a small smile. I don't think I would have had the courage to leave. You see, I was more than a little scared of Simon Rain. I had seen his brutality on occasion and was thankful that it was never directed at me. But I knew that it might not be that way forever. I was too frightened to make a move, but then something changed. Denise finally succeeded in pulling her hand free and shifted away from John a little, her head dropping as if in shame. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For what, Denise? Tell me, for what? I found out I was pregnant. Denise paused and looked up briefly into John's face. His slightly confused look proved he had no idea what she was about to say. I wasn't at my girls' night. Simon Rain contacted me and demanded that I meet him. He said the police were sniffing around and that I needed to keep my mouth shut about his business. If I didn't, he would tell you. She couldn't finish. Tell me what, Denise? That Dee Dee isn't your daughter. She's his. John Meadows had literally stopped breathing, and his mouth dropped open and went quickly dry. John? He had gone unusually pale and slowly rose from the couch and made his way to the large window, and closing his eyes, pressed his forehead to its coolness. His life with Dee Dee began to play in pictures behind his lids. Bringing Denise and Dee Dee home from the hospital, sleepless nights, fevers, food on Dee Dee's face as she laughed and reached up to him, rushing Dee Dee to the hospital. No, no, no. John had started lightly beating his clenched fists on the window. He opened his eyes, and in the window's reflection saw Denise had risen to stand behind him. He whirled around as she reached out to touch his shoulder. No, he said firmly. Denise withdrew her hand quickly. I'm sorry, she continued on a whisper. At first I thought the baby was yours. I wanted it to be yours so much. But that time, Dee Dee cut her leg open and we had to rush her to the emergency room. They asked both of us our blood type. I guess I never asked you, but when you said, "Oh," I knew she couldn't be yours. John finished it for her. We're both type O, and Dee Dee's blood type is B. Denise nodded and dropped her head to her chest. John had left the house, drove around for a couple of hours, and then, after a stop at his storage unit, ended up staring at Simon Rain's building from a stool, his third cup of coffee cooling untouched on the table. For the umpteenth time he reached into his jacket and touched the cool metal of the small silver revolver. The waitress approached to ask if he needed anything, but he shook his head and said no without taking his eyes off the door. It was 3 hours later he spotted his quarry, a driver opening the door for him to exit a large black sedan. John was off his chair like a panther, throwing his money on the table and barreling out the door. Narrowly avoiding being struck by a car, he made it across the street as Simon Rain turned to enter his building. "Simon Rain!" Simon Rain turned at the sound of his name and found himself staring directly into the chambers of a revolver. His driver, paid to be a driver and not a bodyguard, dove for cover along with the other pedestrians on the sidewalk. "You son of a John Meadows yelled, his words drowned out by the first shot, which missed and shattered the plate glass window next to the door. The second shot hit home, striking Simon Rain in the shoulder. John Meadows advanced and leaned over the injured Simon Rain, taking aim one last time, but the sight of blood caused him to freeze, paralyzed by the shock of what he had actually done. He didn't notice the sirens and didn't realize the police had arrived until he was ordered to drop the gun, brought to his knees, and handcuffed. Roland was even more convinced the vandalism at Sinclair Academy was perpetuated by Simon Rain, or at least someone working for him. Back at his desk, he discovered Simon Rain had given him quite a bit. Maybe Rain figured there was no reason not to. His tracks were thoroughly covered. The documents showed Roland that Rain purchased 60 properties over the past 24 months. There was a spreadsheet titled Acquisition History. The address of the property was listed, and the first column showed active or inquiry. It seemed the term inquiry meant they were properties of interest or non-active listings, but Rain or his representatives had approached the owner and inquired whether they were interested in selling. The columns marked first contact showed the dates the owners were approached. Another column further showed the owner's initial response, and depending on that response, the next column labeled offer letter, sent, yes, no, was marked. Of course, it all looked legitimate because there was no column marked intimidation initiated, yes, no. Roland pulled some of the vandalism reports and began to search for addresses for properties Rain had recently acquired. After he got to 12, he realized he may need some help again sorting out all the data, and left a message with the criminal analyst in the Criminal Investigation Support Division who helped him before. Roland glanced at one of the properties and noted that the owner's first response was NI, or not interested. The next column was titled Follow-up and was populated with a date. For the property he was looking at, the date provided was 24 hours before the date listed on the police report. Not hard evidence, but certainly worth exploring. He pulled the assigned detective's follow-up reports and discovered there was no suspect in that particular vandalism case, a suspicious water leak that damaged the building manager's basement office. He sat back trying to sort the data in his mind. He needed a break. There was a connection between Simon Rain and Violet's attack. He knew it, but he just couldn't see it. Even if he added in the land deal, he would only be able to connect Simon Rain and Ella Sinclair. So why assault a 13-year-old girl? How would that benefit Simon Rain? The phone rang and a slight frown crossed Roland's face at the interruption. "Roland." After listening a moment, Roland smiled. He had gotten his break.